Okay, so we go from plastic to the blue economy, and there's lots of words, blue economy, the term is thrown around. And it is a good thing, but it's a bit complex to get it right. So to help us get this thing right, blue economy, make it climate neutral and circular. We have Spyros Kouvelis, mission board member. So now where has he escaped? No, here he is. Spyros, the stage is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's a good way to start it. Paul says it's complex, it's complicated, and I'm giving Spyros 8 minutes to do it. Fantastic. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
3 numbers. 40% of the world population live near coastal zones. 40%. More than 3 billion people utilize the oceans and the seas daily for their livelihood. That's almost half the human population. 80% of the world trade is achieved using the seas, which means that the seas play a more important role than any other type of activity in the life of humans. And through this, we need to understand how much it means. Usually, I have to tell you that I agreed with Paul that I will be spending the first 5 minutes just reading statistics to you, so that I can make it interesting. But I won't. So when we think about the blue economy, we usually think about the economic part, but it's not only this. Because when you think about what the ocean gives back to people, to our societies, we also have ecosystem services. You don't assign a value, I'm selling it to somebody, but it's a system that has value. You have cultural services, very strongly connected. If you add those to the economic values, the overall ocean economy is estimated somewhere between $3 to $6 trillion. Which is a lot. That's the biggest chunk in anything that the economy produces. If you take it in terms of the strict value added, then it goes only down to 1.5 trillion, but this is the size of the economy of Canada. So what the economy does in strict economy, the blue economy does in strict economic terms, is that it's one of the biggest countries. And actually, the OECD is doing a projection that by 2030, this will double. It will become double the size, so it will reach around $3 trillion and provide employment of around 40 million. This is the size of Germany's economy and Germany's workforce. So one thing you learned today is that Germany has twice the size of Canada in terms of the economy. In the European Union, the blue economy, the European Union is a leader in the blue economy, and it has a very high impact in terms of economy. It's about 1.5% in terms of its overall economy, 2.3% in terms of the employment, and that's where the numbers finish. Because Europe, being a great leader, has decided that the blue economy is very important in terms of the resilience of the European economy and also in terms of the sustainability of the European economy. But as Commissioner Kouvelis said in one of his statements, the blue economy sectors are fully embedded and dependent on the natural environment. And that's a very important point to keep in mind, that you cannot think about the blue economy without its connection, the effects it has on the natural environment and the effects that the natural environment has on it. And also, the blue economy has a lot of connections across the board with European policies. Let me just mention a few. Climate change and Fit for 55, blue economy is there. New Green Deal, blue economy is there. Maritime spatial planning, common fisheries policy. Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Marine Data and Knowledge, Sea Basin Strategies, Blue Investment, Farm to Fork Strategy. Across the board of European policies, you will find the blue economy and the blue activities. And when we talk about blue activities, it might be helpful to also make the differentiation that we have two big, let's say, chunks of activities. One is those that we call the established sectors, the ones that have been going on for a long time. So, for example, fisheries, aquaculture, renewable energy, tourism, coastal tourism, environmental protection. These are things that have been going on for a long time, but you have a lot of emerging cases also of this economy, like innovative energy from the ocean, waves, currents, and so on. You have blue bioeconomy, biotechnology, desalination, marine research and technology, of course. All of these things, they come together and make what we call the blue economy. And as I said, Europe is very, very much pegging the development of its own economy and society on the blue economy, but it's not a path that is lined with roses. There are a lot of challenges, and if I can mention just a few that we have heard before, but I'd just like to sum them up, we have climate change. We have plastics and microplastics, we just heard a lot about that. We have pollution that is not plastics, but it's other things like pollutants like PCBs, POPs, and so on, and land-based pollution that comes through the waterways. Loss of biodiversity and ecosystems, all of these are big challenges that actually undermine the capacity that we have to develop a blue economy. And as I said before, the OECD actually foresees that by 2030, the size of the blue economy will double. So when it doubles, that means that the pressures on the ocean's natural assets and natural systems will also increase. So more demands for food, for energy, for minerals, for leisure uses of the sea, and more demand for ocean space. That is one thing that we have not seen very much in the past, but now we're having competing demands for maritime trade, for aquaculture, for renewable energy, for coastal tourism, and so on. And it's very interesting to think that for the first time, not only in Europe, but in the world, we're seeing that it's not just water out there. The sea used to be, a whole bunch of water, but it was huge and everything. It's not anymore. We're living in a change of era where sea is a limited space, and we need to organize all this. But having said all the challenges, let's see how the blue economy can actually become a very important pillar for the development and sustainability of the European and global economy, but also turn the challenges to opportunities. And what I will do in the next very few minutes, and Paul, please give me a sign when we're coming close.
No, it's good. You keep going.
I will mention a few of the challenges and examples that actually are very strong cases of how we turn the challenges to the blue economy. Let me start by climate change. I don't need to explain to you that climate change, as the oceans are absorbing carbon dioxide and the global warming is acidifying the oceans and reducing oxygen levels in the sea, we have harming or killing marine plants, we have ice caps melting and the sea level rising and so on. And there are a number of ocean-based solutions. Actually, the OECD again mentions 5 subsectors: marine conservation, energy, transport, food, and carbon capture. Those 5 sectors only can reduce the emissions gap by 21% in order to curb climate change to the 1.5 degrees. So by actually investing and making these things happen, we do a lot to counteract climate change. Obviously, the example here is the development of offshore renewable energy, and the European Union has a very strong cornerstone in its energy transition. Today, we have 12 gigawatts, and the objective by 2050 is 300 gigawatts of renewable energy. Obviously, we can imagine that not only this adds a lot to addressing climate change, but it creates a very, very strong case also for investment, employment, and so on. Same thing in shipping and maritime. It's interesting to notice that the shipping industry's emissions globally are about 3% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, which is not a huge number, but in absolute terms, it is a big number, lots of tons of CO2 and other emissions. But if you compare it to the fact that 80% of the global trade is done by ships, that, by comparison, is still small. But because the absolute number is important, we need to do something, and also because ocean shipping is also responsible for 30%, that's a bigger number, of the nitrogen oxides, that's the NOx and SOx that we hear very often, which also is a very important pollutant. So now there is a lot of pressure. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization, is currently targeting a 50% cut in the greenhouse gas emissions by comparison to the 2008 levels. There is a lot of international pressure to increase that to 100% of curbing of those greenhouse gas emissions. But what is important is that if we go down this way of curbing the 100%, the actual full sector decarbonization will be worth $1 trillion. $1 trillion means a lot of investment. And of course, this is not something that the world is asking the shipping sector to carry it by itself. It needs to also take a lot of international cooperation, supportive regulation, investment security, and so on. Same thing for the ports. Same thing for the ports, because the ports are very important places where we can do a lot of change in electrification, in new technologies, artificial intelligence, and so on, for automation, for logistics. And all of these, they create a lot of investment opportunities and jobs. And I'll come to plastics, which is one of the challenges that we mentioned before. I will mention some numbers here. If they don't agree with what Jussi said before, you should believe Jussi because he's a scientist and I'm a politician. So, about 8 million tons of plastics and 1.5 million tons of microplastics get into the ocean every year. That's a big number. And let me see some hands. There was a study in the UK 2 years ago. They collected 50 dead bodies of mammals, sea mammals like dolphins and seals and so on, and they did an analysis to see how many of them had actually had swollen bits of plastic. So I want to see some hands who believe that the percentage of the animals that had swollen plastics was 30%. Who goes for 30%? Let me see some hands. Nobody goes for 30%. Who thinks it was 65% of the animals that actually had plastic in their stomachs? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. How many of you think that it was 100% of the animals? Exactly. And they had actually an average of 5.5 particles in their stomach. So they had ingested at least at an average 5.5 times plastics. That means that there is a lot of plastic going there. And in fact, the analysis shows that macroplastics, the big ones, they account for 88, almost 90% of what you find in the oceans. The remaining 12% is the microplastics. So these are the things that cannot be traced. And in this case, it is important to note that size matters a lot, and small size is a killer because it builds on the organisms. Now, this is a problem, and we heard a lot about how companies can actually be part of the solution, new technologies, and so on. I just want to mention 2 examples. One is a Norwegian-American company that actually collects plastics and turns it into traveling equipment like suitcases and so on. And this company actually made a profit of more than 1 million over the first 3 quarters of 2022, while at the same time removing over 500,000 kilograms of plastic from the ocean. Also, my drinking bottle is made out of recycled plastic only from the ocean. Sustainable food from the ocean, very important, but I'm running out of time, so I will try to wrap up a bit. And the one thing that I want to mention also is the importance of supporting all this, not only through policy, which in Europe we have, but also through investment. And we heard a lot about investment. This morning, Charlina Vicheva mentioned all the investments that are coming from Horizon Europe, from Blue Invest and so on. But we also need the private sector. And here we have a problem because overall, the private sector and private equity is investing for impact investment, for sustainability investment globally around $43 trillion of assets under management. Of this, specifically targeted funding and investment for the blue economy and specifically for what we would call SDG 14, so the marine environment, is only 1.92 billion, which is less than 4%. That is a problem. Of course, it's good news in a way because 6 years ago it was less than 1%. So now we've come up to 4%, but it is a very high need and a very high opportunity as well. So we need also the investment from the private sector to be increased very much. And finally, 4 things I want to mention in terms of increasing the effort for developing the blue economy that will change the lives of Europe and the world. The first one is that the blue economy cannot be developed unless we also deal with what we call the financial barriers, so problems that usually developing countries have with high levels of external debt and so on. The second is social justice. If blue economy development happens at the expense of the less advantageous of the local people that live by the sea but do not have a lot of political power, this actually creates the opposite effect because you need to very much take into account the needs they have and they serve through this. The third point is science. Science is hugely important because, as it was said a lot today, we have a lot of gaps in our knowledge for the oceans. Developing the ocean twin is very important, and I will here quote what the director of the IOC, Mr. Yabinin, said to me once. I asked him, what do you think is the greatest risk for the oceans? And he said, it is misinformation and fake news. This is the biggest problem because we need to lead the people to where the actual problems are. And finally, we need to rethink innovation for a sustainable economy and promote it very much. This is why the work that is done also under the mission to bring together those that bring solutions and innovation to make it happen is very important. I'll stop here. I could be speaking on this issue for hours, but I don't think that Paul will be very happy. Thank you.
Bravo, Spyros. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great one. Thank you for bringing in the numbers factor, because so many of us hear about blue economy. It's a great way of communicating because we're talking about money. And we hear, we hear things like conservation finance, debt for nature swaps, tourism, the beautiful way of communicating this shark is worth this much dead and this much alive for tourism. We hear all these things, but you put it into context for making it happen. Thank you very much, Spyros. Under the same...